With our daughter's unwavering support, my husband asked me for a divorce the day his first love became a widow. This silver-haired man immediately turned away from me and married his first love. Their happy wedding pictures went viral when they were uploaded online, captivating the entire internet community. And he stumbled toward me as I entered their wedding banquet. His legs were wobbly, but he held his first L's hand firmly. His voice cracked as he implored, "Cynthia, don't ruin my wedding, let's part on good terms." I grinned, understood that he wasn't trying to make trouble, and I'm here to give you both a big present. Not long ago, my husband, Albert, abruptly asked for a divorce. I was shocked because he was 70 years old. What could have led him to believe this? Albert didn't try to hide it. Kristen's husband passed away, and she needs me now. I want to live out the rest of my days with her. Shock and heartbreak were my initial reactions, but almost without thinking, I began to wonder if I had done something wrong or if this was just another one of his tantrums. If not, how could this elderly man have come up with something so ridiculous? However, regardless of what I said or did, his mind was already made up, and he was. 2 weeks ago, when he was still sitting at home with his glasses on his nose, reading the newspaper and waiting for me to bring him his food, he was determined to leave me. Now that he was someone else's husband, I calmly looked around the room where the event was held. Someone was holding a big bouquet of fresh flowers, ready to give them to the happy couple. It was my daughter Lisa, and as soon as she saw me, she quickly shoved the bouquet into the hands of the person next to her. The room was packed with Albert's students, old friends, and Kristen's loyal readers and admirers. Her voice carried a hint of frustration as she pushed through the crowd to get to us. "Mom, what are you doing here? It's Dad's big day. If you're here to cause a scene, don't blame me for getting upset and asking you out. Dad and Aunt Kristen were forced apart for almost 40 years because of you. Haven't you had him long enough because of me?" she said. Naturally asked, "What kind of person do you think I am?" Lisa's sharp, unblinking eyes fell on me, and she said in an unconcerned tone, "Your dad is a scholar and expert, and his students are spread across the country. He's a man of influence, and you're just an uneducated housewife, Kristen. You shouldn't talk to your mother like that," she added, gently tugging at Lisa's hand. "A housewife who raised you and cared for your father all these years, she's had a hard life too," she continued. "Sure, Kristen, if you say so." Then she was eager to get rid of me, shutting me out before I could even say anything. The next thing I knew, I was being escorted out of the hotel's grand entrance as if they were concerned I might turn around. She turned back to me, still impatient but noticeably more restrained. "Mom, you shouldn't be here. This is Dad and Aunt Kristen's wedding." Lisa hurriedly added, "Mom, Barry will be leaving school soon, and no one is home, so why don't you pick him up and take him to the playground?" That made me stop. I took a deep breath and forced down the brewing anger inside of me. For the time being, I would let it go. After taking a deep breath, I turned around and decided to go pick up Barry. However, as a group of young people hurried toward the hotel, they unintentionally knocked me over. One of them quickly helped me up and apologized breathlessly, saying, "Sorry, ma'am. We're in a hurry for the wedding," his companion called out. I watched as they vanished inside their energy, vibrating with enthusiasm. The dazzling glow of Professor Albert and Miss Kristen's wedding has already begun, so quit wasting time chatting to that lady. We're already late. It felt like a smack to the face, and I laughed bitterly in everyone's eyes as the crystal chandeliers inside the wedding hall made my head spin on the enormous projection screen. Their wedding photo was displayed magnificently, with the hashtag #LoveNoSnowFear emblazoned underneath it. I was never good enough to be Albert's match, but once upon a time, I should have had the opportunity to attend school because my father had used all of our savings to pay for Albert, his best friend's orphan son, to attend. To make that happen, I had to drop out that night, and I heard my mother sobbing as she tried to hide her tears when she informed my father that if he hadn't allowed Cynthia to attend college, she would have ended up like me. His only response was to discreetly suck on his cigarette, but even at that point, I wasn't upset. Instead, I was pleased for Albert. Said, "You can go to school now, and when you come home, you can teach me everything you learn in college." Albert looked back every few steps when he left for school the first time, as if he was feeling guilty, but I had only discovered him being obnoxious when he returned. In order to buy Albert a gift that winter, I worked even harder in the country with my parents in the hopes that by autumn, we would have more produce. Albert had once held my hand and assured Cynthia that, "Don't worry, once I graduate and land a good job, I'll bring you to live with me, and we'll have a good life together." But now he looked down on. He repeatedly told me, "Cynthia, why don't you write a book when you have time? And we have nothing in common." Every time he said that, I couldn't help but think that, at my age, with a household, I would be embarrassed to tell my students that my wife is truly uneducated and ignorant. Full of obligations, where was I supposed to find the time to sit and read? Whenever I refused, he would become irritated, throw away his newspaper, and leave the room while muttering Kristen's name. I'm going over to Kristen's for tea. Maybe I'll play a game of chess with Frank while I'm there. I finally realized that it was never about playing chess with Kristen's husband, Frank. Rather, it was about watching the woman he had always regarded as his ideal wife lost in thought. I halted and looked up, having already reached the kindergarten. The playground was deserted. All the other kids had been picked up. I discovered Barry still inside the classroom window. His teacher sighed with relief when he saw me because I couldn't reach Barry's mother. I'm so happy you came, Barry. Your grandmother is here to pick you up. I swiftly took Barry's little hand, thanked the teacher, and escorted him outside to the bus stop. Barry tilted his head up at me, his voice sweet, and I smiled and said, "Where are we going, Grandma?" His little mouth instantly pouted, saying, "I don't want to go, I want to go to Grandpa's wedding." I was shocked to see that even Barry was aware of their wedding. How precisely had they explained it to a child, and did they tell him that he was 70 years old? My mind was a jumbled mess, but Barry pulled up my hand and swung it back and forth, saying, "Grandma, please take me, pretty please." His bright eyes were full of anticipation as I heard my new grandfather's decision to go back and reunite with his first love after all these years. Grandma is Kristen, and many of my students adore her. Now that I can tell them that my grandma is a well-known author, perhaps they won't make fun of me. I knelt, took his small backpack off his shoulders, and smiled gently at him. At that moment, I decided everything was fine, I replied. On the way to your grandfather's wedding, Barry continued to chatter in his tiny voice, asking, "Grandma, does this mean you won't be living with us anymore?" He paused, then added, "The other day I heard Mom and Grandpa talking about sending you back to the countryside." My chest tightened, but I forced a smile, asking, "Do you want to stay with us?" Barry's little face wrinkled up in reluctance to return to the country. After giving it some serious thought, he replied, "If you leave, I won't get to eat your chocolate cake anymore, but if people find out my new grandma is Christian, they'll be so jealous of me." He continued to mumble to himself, considering the advantages and drawbacks of his small predicament. Totally engrossed in his thoughts, I couldn't help but laugh, both amused and frustrated. At least Barry was forthright about his sentiments, in contrast to his mother and grandfather, who concealed their emotions behind their masks of moral rectitude while pursuing his purported true love. The other wanted a stepmother to elevate her social status, but they both blamed me directly. "If you had simply educated yourself more, we wouldn't have ended up this way." Albert's final words before leaving our house still ring in my head, and Lisa completely agreed with him. "Mom, don't take it too hard. Dad and Aunt Kristen are a great match, and let's face it, you're just a housewife. You've had so many wonderful years with Dad, shouldn't you be thankful?" Even a child realized that they wanted me gone, even though I yelled at him. "Would you regret it if you knew that the son you gave up so much for was an unappreciative man?" Albert proposed to me the day after I graduated from college, and I still remember it. "I was apprehensive because I knew you were smart and had a bright future ahead of you, so how could I possibly be good enough for you? Don't marry me just because you feel obligated to my father. Neither he nor I would ever want to force you to do that." But Albert had looked at me with all seriousness, and I just felt that we were a good fit and would be happy together. It had been such a straightforward confession, and I had believed him at the time. I had assumed that love was about friendship and starting a life. The same man who once pledged to build a future with me had rewritten our story, removing me from its pages as if I had never existed. We talked about trust, and I never dreamed that decades later I would be discarded like an old, outdated book that he was embarrassed to be seen with. Now, he stood beside Kristen, hand in hand, soaking up the crowd's admiration. My father sat outside my door until dawn the night before my wedding, and when I opened it the following morning, I discovered a stack of cigarette butts at his feet. He looked up at me and spoke in a steady but heavy voice, saying, "Don't worry, Cynthia. If Albert ever mistreats you, I'll stand up for you." However, my father passed away. By the time I got to the hotel, the banquet was still going strong, and Albert and Kristen were glowing as newlyweds. 5 years later, before he ever had the chance to fulfill that promise, with no one left to protect me, Albert never had to hold back, and Albert was the closest person in the world to me. As soon as Barry saw Albert, who was in the middle of the room getting blessings from their visitors, he went toward him with uncontrollable excitement. "Grandpa, you look so handsome today," he said in a childlike voice that sent a ripple of laughter around the hall, and Barry realized this was a happy time occasion, but nobody in the room knew that the suit Albert was wearing, the one that gave him such a polished and dignified appearance, was made by me. Nobody also knew that there was a single stray blue thread of stitching inside the cuff, which he had previously referred to as his lucky charm, but today he had pulled it from the back of his closet, put it on, and married someone else. Kristen turned to me and smiled gently. "Cynthia, come sit down. Albert said you were going to move back to the country. What are your plans?" Before I could respond, whispers started to circulate among the guests. "Why is this woman here? She must have had the courage to marry someone like Professor Albert despite having neither talent nor accomplishments. How could she possibly accept his divorce so quickly? Let's face it, though, she was never a match for him in the first place. And just because their fathers were friends doesn't mean she had the right to keep him forever. Their words pierced me like 1,000 tiny blades, bringing back memories I had long suppressed, such as how, even after years of marriage, Albert never once let me visit his office, not even to bring him food, clothing, or important documents. Every time I had to drop something off, he demanded that I leave it with the security guard, who said that I was only the housekeeper, or when I had hesitantly asked him to suggest some books for me, he had given me a chilly and contemptuous response, asking if I even could read them. If you have time for books, you should be in the kitchen, where we are hungry. Worthy of knowledge because if I were to learn to read and expand my horizons, he would no longer have a reason to disparage me. Without that justification, how could he justify abandoning me and returning to his beloved first love? Mom, are you dozing off for everyone's watching? Lisa's voice jolted me out of my reverie. She let out an irritated sigh. Just go now, take $100, get a cab, and go home without causing a scene. I'll return after the wedding and have dinner with you, all right? He took out the money and prepared to thrust it into my hand. For years, I had been nothing more than a housewife with no source of income, but they carefully managed every cent of my allowance, ensuring that I never had enough money saved for myself. All expenses had to be tracked, even when I became ill, and needed to ask for money for a doctor's appointment. Now, however, she was ready to throw money at me in an attempt to get me to leave, which was ironic as I looked at the bills. Lisa stopped, perplexed by my response, wondering if that was enough, and asked, "Fine, 300, no, 500, will that do?" Before she could continue, I slapped her across the face. Lisa froze, too stunned to respond, and the room fell silent as curious bystanders craned their necks to watch the spectacle unfold. I stared her in the eyes, and my voice was cold. "Who do you think you're talking to? You're bribing your mother to leave so your father can get married." As Lisa stood there in shock, her cheek scorching scarlet, Albert sighed, his tone thick with strained patience. "Calm down, Cynthia. This is my wedding. His mistress in peace, you're just as ungrateful as he is," Kristen said. Stopped before saying, "I admit that your father helped me. Without him, I might not have been able to attend college. I might have starved to death. But I've paid that debt back over the years. I never mistreated you." Kristen said, "I know this," in a soft voice that seemed to be trying to calm me. "Cynthia, I understand that you and Albert have a long history together, but I'm not trying to erase it." Albert turned back to me with a tired expression. "So why are you holding on to the past? Why can't you just let go?" I laughed briefly, and, "Half of what you said is true. You treated me fairly. After all, I didn't starve to death under your roof. However, while you were away obtaining research grants, the majority of that money went directly to Kristen and her family. I continued to speak without wavering, and after I gave birth to Lisa, you stopped sharing a bed. No, you no longer shared a room with me at all. You told me that you needed a quiet place to concentrate on your research and that you didn't want to wake Lisa or me up. Even when Lisa was away, you wouldn't approach me. I looked him in the eye and cocked my head, and I now understand why the commotion in the crowd became louder. You weren't protecting your... I thought Professor Albert was forced into his first marriage, but now, even if he didn't love her, he was married to her. Academic focus, you were protecting yourself for Kristen. A startled silence descended over the group before the whispers broke out again. Albert murmured, "How could you say something like that in front of all these people?" and his expression clouded. "Treating her like that with the silent treatment for decades is just cruel." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, now. You care about that?" Albert shook his head, his hands clenched at his sides. "You've had decades of dignity, Albert. Where was that dignity when you were skulking behind Frank's back and you and Kristen were running around behind her husband's back to keep your little affair alive?" The moment I said those words, I took a step closer. My voice was sharp and unwavering. There were gasps, whispers, and scandalized murmurs throughout the banquet hall. Albert's hand shot up, his finger almost jabbing at my face, and his entire body trembled with anger. "You foolish woman, do you have no shame?" He growled, and I interrupted him. "Yes, I am foolish," he said. Smiled slowly and deliberately, "but at least I know the difference between right and wrong. Unlike you." Albert was practically shivering, and his face was red with rage. "Decades ago, on a calm evening, my father brought me home, and for the first time in years, I felt light. Albert lived in our home from that night on. He told us that the boy was the son of a close friend who had once saved his life, and that I couldn't just leave him to fend for himself. My mother was a straightforward and compassionate woman who never questioned my father's choices, she only knew how to follow them." When my mother heard these whispers, she would rush to the door with her hands on her hips, prepared to fight anyone who dared to spread such filth. "Which one of you is it?" he led, but our small town was full of gossipers, and rumors spread like wildfire. Are you sure that boy isn't your husband's bastard child? Perhaps you've robbed the child of his mistress. When she turned back to Albert, her expression softened, and she would say, "Don't worry, sweetheart. No one will dare bully you as long as I'm here. Cowards are running your mouth, and my man is nothing like that. Go home and watch over your husbands before they start cheating." He was fierce and unrelenting. I, like my mother, fought tirelessly for Albert, and anyone who even mentioned his name negatively would be at my mercy. Even the biggest boys in town knew that if they said anything more about Albert, I would smash their skulls in with a rock. I never thought that things would end this way back then. Albert's voice brought me back to the present, his face as cold as ice, after I had realized, after all those years of being by his side, that I had wasted my entire life on a fraud. "I've already told you that I'm spending the rest of my life with Kristen, so no matter how much of a scene you make, it won't change anything other than making me look foolish." I spat at his feet, "And I don't care who you spend the rest of your life with," I said. "I never said you couldn't move on, but our divorce isn't finalized yet, and you've already rushed to throw yourself a wedding." My voice was full of derision. "Tell me who this is." I stepped forward without dignity and stared him down. "You want a divorce, that's fine, but I won't accept your terms." My voice became harder. "I gave this marriage everything, and now you want to throw me out with nothing. Do you think I'm too foolish or uneducated?" Knowing how unfair that is, Kristen laughed low and contemptuously, her eyes full of condescension. Cynthia snarled, "I'm not asking you to leave with nothing, it's just that, well, sustaining a household for all these years has been expensive, and there isn't much left except," she said, "don't worry, Albert will still give you a living allowance when you move back to the country, and I'll even help cover the costs to renovate your old house." The crowd erupted in open contempt, and I realized that she was only interested in money. Wouldn't let go so easily. What a liar, what a disgrace, clinging to him for dear life even after he's moved on. I laughed bitterly and coldly. I thought I was in a room full of intellectuals, so I spoke slowly, my voice brimming with irony, "But it turns out you're just as uninformed as they are." I looked across the room and chuckled again, quietly this time. Then I went back to face Kristen and Albert, and my smile was razor sharp. "You want to play it this way, okay?" I tilted my chin. I may be 70 years old, but at least I've lived long enough to fully understand life before it ended. I didn't argue with them any longer. Instead, I just turned and went home while they were still celebrating, packing my things. "I'll see you in court." When I realized I had only one suitcase, barely half full, and almost nothing to take with me, I dragged myself to the front door and ran into them just as they got back. Lisa was the first to say, "Mom, you can stay at the house for a while if you want, we're going on a short trip anyway," in a casual tone as though we hadn't just. I had never imagined my daughter to be so close to Kristen, so I shook my head and laughed softly. "I hope you all have a great trip." I wasn't upset, I didn't argue that. Kristen's new book launch was taking place in the next city over, and it seemed like they all wanted to make a trip out of it. Albert's voice, "Cheer up, Cynthia. I know you're a reasonable person, just don't do anything foolish," alright, seemed to unsettle them more than anything else. Even Lisa, who had always treated me with thinly veiled contempt, looked a little uncomfortable. "Where are you going?" she asked. "I'll drive you." Even when I asked Lisa to drive me to the market, she would always say no, too ashamed to let anyone see her scholarly father's illiterate wife. However, today she was offering to drive me somewhere out of guilt. Perhaps I looked at her with an unreadable expression. Lisa's lips parted slightly as if she wanted to say something, but I didn't wait to hear it. I turned away without a second glance. I said evenly, "You should stay here and bond with your new mother. After all, you'll need her influence if you want to keep climbing that social ladder." When I left that house that evening, I came across Lisa's most recent post online, which was a family shot. In the picture, Lisa was leaning in close to Kristen, their faces pressed together like mother and daughter. If Kristen had ever had a real daughter, she wouldn't have looked any different, but Kristen couldn't have. Frank, who loved her fiercely and devotedly and never wavered, had adored her even more after she became infertile due to a serious disease she had contracted when she was younger. However, even as I considered Frank's unfailing love for her, after hearing my story, I contacted a lawyer to draft a new divorce agreement because I felt sorry for him, because if Kristen had never given Albert any hope, he wouldn't have proposed to her as soon as Frank passed away. The truth was that those two had been involved long before Frank passed away. Disclose him as the A party in this marriage. Otherwise, if he claims in court that he has been your support system for all these years, it may disadvantage you when it comes to asset division. With his help, I made a brief video and posted it to social media, in which I detailed the decades I had spent with Albert, the sacrifices I had made, and how I was being thrown away like an old, useless object. I don't want him back, I just want what I'm owed. My lawyer insisted that I add that last line first because I was concerned. After all, many guests had already arrived at the wedding. referred to me as shameless for having the audacity to attend. I knew that the internet would condemn me even more, but to my surprise, the response was completely different. Wait, isn't this the woman from that well-publicized wedding, the original wife? Grandma, you did the right thing, you must stand up for your rights. You gave up everything for him, and now he would like to. It's not even about money. She sacrificed her education for him and devoted her entire life to being a housewife, and now he wants to send her to the country with nothing? That's just evil. As the video game traction progressed, my phone rang, and Albert and I answered it already. I heard Barry's little voice choked with sobs in the background, knowing what he was going to say to Cynthia. His tone was hurried, and he said, "You want money? Fine, I'll give it to you. Just stop encouraging people to attack Kristen." Her eyes were swollen, and she had been crying a lot. If those words had been spoken earlier, I would have been devastated, but now I just smiled calmly and said over the phone, "I've had my lawyer draft a new divorce agreement, sign it, and once we're officially divorced, I won't bring this. Grandma only wants money, grandma is bad." When I believed this nightmare was finally coming to an end, Lisa posted on social media, "My mother has been a housewife all her life, but she has a domineering personality, my dear." Albert was silent for a long time until he eventually exhaled and hung up. In her video, she repeatedly hinted that my father had cheated, but let me ask, how could he have done so? He is 70 years old and has lived his entire life trapped in a hopeless marriage. He only worked up the courage to cheat when he felt his days were running out. Her actions put a great deal of pressure on my father and me. Aunt Kristen had the guts to file for divorce, and then she was widowed. Two young lovers were finally reunited in their twilight years. What's so wrong with that? Her remarks sparked a whole new round of conversation, and this time, it wasn't just about me. Men who felt helpless in their marriages flocked to in defense of Albert. I understand his point of view that a wife who is overbearing and suffocating after a long day of work is all a man needs at home. If your wife is too strong-willed, life becomes intolerable. Kristen looks like such a kind person, and she and Albert are a much better match. That the tides turned against me once more, labeling me an overbearing old woman who fussed over nothing. Not one of them gave a damn about the truth, and Lisa even sent me a message mocking me, saying, "I told you, didn't I? Stop fighting, just go back to the countryside and live out the rest of your days in peace with Lisa." He saw Albert's opportunity to change his mind. The man who had previously been so eager to make amends was now avoiding me, and my lawyer was unable to get through to him. Calls went unanswered, and my lawyer's voice was filled with rage. "Ma'am, your daughter is something else. Does she not understand what you've been through? You dedicated your entire life to this family, and this is how they..." As public opinion shifted in their favor, Kristen made a big show of her victory at a book signing. She made a veiled statement that was directed at me. "A woman, no matter her age, is always a rose meant to be paid, to be treasured, and if she isn't loved properly, maybe she wasn't a rose worth loving in the first place." The audience cheered her poetic sentiment, unaware of the poison in it, and I laughed icily. She truly believed she had won, and right. When everyone thought I was going to lose this battle, I found someone. Frank's nephew, Patrick, was willing to testify on my behalf. Frank had never had a biological kid, but he had always loved children and had given his nephew all of his attention. When he passed away, Kristen wasn't even by his side. She had been away and the person who stayed at his bedside to send him farewell was Patrick, who also made a video for me. "Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Wilson, and I am officially Kristen's nephew, but my uncle was Frank Wilson, Kristen's husband, or, perhaps more accurately, her ex-husband now that she has wasted no time. I've loved photography since I was a child, and my uncle encouraged me by getting me my first camera. With that camera, I took a picture that I wished I had never seen of Kristen with other men for years, and I debated whether or not to tell anybody. I married someone else after his death, before I could decide whether to break my uncle's heart. He had already left, and I couldn't help but wonder whether Kristen was to blame. My uncle had been emotionally distant for years, and Kristen had never even tried to conceal her affairs. Even though these pictures are decades old, they are clear enough to reveal the truth, and Albert was one of those men. I didn't anticipate that they had been involved for so long. After the video ended, I called Patrick and thanked him repeatedly. He remained silent for a while before he finally sighed. "Ma'am, you and my uncle and you are both good people, and I won't let you suffer the way he did. Some people may age, but their morals are still rotten, and they don't deserve our respect." When Lisa's message appeared, "You froze all the family assets. How are we to live now?" My lawyer issued an official statement after Albert's call, and his voice was upset. "How could you go through with suing me? Do you want to ruin my reputation?" I didn't bother entertaining him. Patrick's video had ignited a storm. Public opinion flipped once again. My client spent her life in this family, only to be betrayed in her older years and left with nothing. This is plain unfair, and as her attorney, I will make sure that her legal rights are upheld and take legal action against individuals spreading this misinformation. The only disagreement that remains after a divorce is the division of assets. I used to adore Kristen so much, but after learning the truth, I can't believe I ever saw her as an inspiration. That one simple sentence carried such immense weight. False accusations against her began to surface, and more people spoke up, including former neighbors, Albert's co-workers, and even a young woman who had once been her devoted fan. Books were taken off the shelves, and a number of publishing houses publicly broke off their relationships with her after making statements about her actions. We value literature and morality equally, and when I opened my door one evening, I discovered they were there, Albert and Kristen. When Kristen saw me, her knees gave way and she almost fell to the ground. "Cynthia, please, I can't take this any longer. Please, let's let this go." Albert stood next to her, his face flushed crimson with embarrassment for a moment. He remained silent for a while before muttering, "If you leave Kristen alone, I'll come back, and we can go back to the way things were." I looked at him for a moment before laughing briefly. "You think too highly of yourself, don't you?" His eyes flickered. "You believe I'm doing all this just to get you back?" I grinned at Albert. "I stopped thinking of you as my husband the day you requested a divorce. I'm not attempting to win you back, I'm just reclaiming what I'm entitled to for myself and my parents, who sacrificed so much for you." Albert's face darkened even more, and Kristen was still kneeling and sobbing quietly. I raised my foot, and she was taken by surprise when I gave her a slight shove, and she staggered to the side, staring up at me in disbelief since, despite their accusations that I was violent and controlling, I had never touched any of them. I never took offense at anything they hurled at me, but now that I had endured it all, I looked down at Kristen, and her breath caught as she smiled enough with the ACT, and he realized that she didn't mean a word of that. Additionally, her only choice at this moment was to remain with Albert. Without him, she had nothing, not even someone to look after her when she became old, and I knew Albert as well. He was already preparing his next move, so as he cleared his throat, he tried speaking. More softly this time. "Cynthia, I truly apologize for everything. Let's go on, shall we?" Lisa's name appeared at that same moment. "Dad says, Mom, Dad, and Kristen went to see you. Are you guys talking?" Up on my phone, I typed back, "Yes, your parents are here, and your mom is crying," and Lisa nearly replied, "They're there to apologize to you." I glanced at the message for a moment, wondering, what's with my mom? "Aren't you crying?" They were quite shameless, and I immediately blocked this mother-daughter's number before they chuckled cruelly. The relationship had ended 30 minutes after Albert and Kristen departed, and my attorney, Albert, had consented to sign. He told me about the divorce papers, so I wasn't shocked that Albert had spent his. He was so consumed by his reputation that he would never bring himself to court over a divorce in his 70s. He couldn't afford that kind of humiliation, especially not against a lady who had once been his benefactor's daughter. The agreement was straightforward. In addition to the money in our accounts, he would pay me back, and the house would stay his. Even though the extra $300,000 wasn't much, I knew it was the most he could donate with that sum. I constructed a farmhouse restaurant on a plot of property in the country, growing my veggies, kept ducks and hens, and news gradually got out about my small retreat. People adored the peaceful setting. Over time, my modest business grew by producing fresh eggs without the use of pesticides, a reputation, and on Thanksgiving Day, as the number of guests increased, I was reviewing the finances in the farmhouse when someone recognized me, and a young woman cautiously came up to say, "Pardon me, ma'am." There was a flicker of interest and respect in her voice as she said, as though disclosing a secret, "Are you that brave divorced grandma?" It took me a moment to understand what she was saying, but once I did, I nodded it and smiled, and she brightened up. She was one of a former admirer of Kristen's writings, and one of Albert's former students acknowledged that she was completely disillusioned after the scandal arose and wasn't sure which so-called intellectuals could still be trusted, but after hearing your story, she went on, and I was motivated. Demonstrated that you can begin a new life at the age of 70. We all believe you're really brave. Through her, I discovered what had happened to Albert and Kristen. The scandal hadn't simply subsided, it had left a huge fallout. Albert, who had been employed by his former university on a special contract upon his retirement, was permanently stained, ended without a ceremony, and his legacy was erased from Kristen's books when the school discreetly took his photo down from their walls. Were taken off the shelves, and Lisa intended to utilize Kristen's reputation to elevate her position, get a better career, and move up the social ladder, but that goal had suddenly fallen apart in front of her eyes. She had nothing left to use as leverage without Kristen's influence, and ultimately, as Lisa's life progressed, her hatred for Kristen became even more intense than her contempt for me. Started dismantling the social circle she had worked so hard to enter by exploiting. Kristen's ambition was quickly exposed by her name as a ladder Concealed as Lisa's once optimistic intentions fell apart and her adoration for Kristen transformed into resentment and contempt. The scandal involving her family only served to further isolate her from others, as her career path appeared to be barred. A new position was met with chilly rejections, and her situation was strained with both Kristen and Albert. Lisa contacted me one evening, her voice strained as she spoke, and she kept dwindling. The higher she aimed, the farther she plummeted. Just a whisper, "Mama. I messed up and lost everything." I didn't respond. Hearing her confess did not immediately bring her any satisfaction. Instead, it was a silent acknowledgement that she had at last faced. "I informed you of the repercussions of her decisions," and I gently retorted, "You can't jump on the backs of others to advance what you want, but ultimately, it has just left you with." She didn't answer, and the stillness on the other end was filled with remorse. Realized that there was nothing else I could say to her and that she would now have to deal with the fallout from her actions. Had started to feel more like the serene days I had spent in my country retreat as a child. Very different from the oppressive years I had spent seeking acceptance and approval from individuals who never genuinely valued me. Had created a life that was all mine, free from deceit, manipulation, and the burden of implicit expectations. I spent growing the farm, trying out new dishes for the eatery, and sometimes running into other women who it was more satisfying to watch my hard work pay off when people, like me, had changed later in life than any position or honor I had ever pursued. I came to understand that contentment wasn't about proving people incorrect or creating a space where I could be who I am. I had to pay a high price for the pursuit of revenge, for the lessons I had learned, but as I stood on the stage, I had never felt more content with my identity and the life I had created. Porch one evening as I watched the sun set behind the